Hi, everyone. We're going to get started around 12:03 just to make sure everyone has time to join.
Okay, I think I have 9:03. What do you think, Brittany? Should we go ahead and get started?
Yeah, looks like we have a almost full house.
I think too. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm Nancy Enneking. I'm head of special collections management at the Getty Research Institute in Los Angeles. And I'll let Brittany introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brittany Newberry. I'm the Music and Popular Culture Archivist at Georgia State University in Atlanta, Georgia.
And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here just to bring up the agenda. And let me get rid of all of my Zoom stuff because it's blocking things. Um, So here's our agenda for today. So this is, just make sure you're at the right place. We're going to talk today about managing space in ArchivesSpace. And to manage space, there are certain functionality that you actually have to employ. There are a lot of things you can do in ArchivesSpace that don't go as far as this. But if you actually want to use the full space management functionality, we're going to step you through everything that you would need to do and a lot of the things that you would need to think about. So our agenda here, schedule it as glass, we're going to sort of follow this. There may be places where, we deviate from the exact time by a few minutes one way or the other, but you will get your break about 1:30, and we'll try and make sure that we have plenty of time for you to ask questions. You are welcome to ask questions in the chat, I believe, along the way. I'm going to handle the first half of the training session, and Brittany's going to handle the second. And while each of us is speaking, the other will try and answer questions in the background. And in case, for example, when I'm speaking this morning, if there's a question that comes up, it's like, I really didn't get what you just said. Could you please repeat it? Brittany will jump in and interrupt me to make sure that I can repeat it so that you understand. And please do ask questions along the way. We have an agenda we cover, but this is your workshop. And the idea is that you should walk away with the information that you need. So please ask questions. Please ask us to repeat things. That we actually have a fair amount to cover in the 3 hours, but you need to get out of it what you need to get out of it. So with that, let me see. Brittany, any opening thoughts, remarks from you?
No, I think I'm good for now.
All right. So let me go ahead and start diving into this a little bit with the overview. So as you said, walking down the agenda, sorry, we're going to walk through just sort of an overview of the things we're going to cover. We're going to talk about some basics of instances and top containers. I know that we ask that people come to the workshop with some experience in ArchivesSpace, but we know that not everybody's experience is uniform. So we're just going to cover a few basics there. And then talk about container profiles and the manage top containers section, and the extent calculated this morning. Then we'll show locations in the afternoon, and toward the end of the day, everything that we do will kind of build on itself. And so by the end, we will be able to show you how the space calculator functions. So that said, I'm going to actually bounce over to ASpace, and I believe that you have a quick start guide as part of your materials. And I'm going to pull up a chart that's toward the top of it just to walk through this briefly, to sort of show how all of these pieces fit together that we'll be talking about over the course of this session. So in accessions, resources, and archival objects, there's the opportunity to minimize. Sorry, I have some Zoom stuff, and I'll hide a few panels so I can see things a little better on my screen. And okay. So they have what we're going to talk about today are fundamentally physical instances. As part of instances, you can also handle, it will also handle digital objects, but that's not what we're talking about because today we're focusing on how to use ArchivesSpace to help you assign boxes to locations and track your physical space. We're going to be dealing with physical instances, and that's what the focus is going to be. Now, as we walk through, there are a number of things you can do as you build out all of this functionality. If you want to use a bunch of this to help you do certain things, you can without going fully to space management. So for example, if you have physical instances and you have top containers and you assign them to locations, you can print out a shelf list. It will help you know where your materials are, and that's fine. You could stop there and go no further if you needed to. If you just wanted to be able to get the system to help you calculate the size of your collection, if you have your top containers and you declare how big those containers are, the system can do the math and tell you how large your overall collection is. If you actually do the fourth part here, declare location size, which is to say how big is your shelf. If you have a container, it's assigned a location, and the system knows both how big the location is and how big the container is. It enables you to find and track empty space. That's why we're going to cover all of this today. So that's that part. The parts of the system we're going to walk through today are going to be, and we're going to come back to some of these areas over and over again. So we're going to actually work within resources a little bit to look at creating the top containers and instances. We're going to create locations in the second part of today's session, both single and batch locations. We're going to actually be over here in this system part to show managing container profiles, which is where you declare how large, if I click on it, what the size of your boxes are, and or your containers are, and we'll show you how to create one. We'll be in location profiles, show you how to declare how large your shelves and your storage units are. And then we'll be over here under this little gear drop down, which is where manage top containers is. So these are the parts of the system that we'll be revisiting constantly today. So clearly it's only a very small part of the subset of what ArchivesSpace can do, but that's what we'll be focused on. One of the things I want to be sure to point out as part of this introduction is the permissions that you may need to set in order to use some of this functionality. Because I'm logged in to this particular implementation of ArchivesSpace as an administrator, I can see everything. So I can see the managed location and container profiles sections. If you're logged in, it could be that you don't see them. The place to find these permissions is over. You can see them under the gear drop down in manage groups is a good place to find them. So for example, if you're in as a manager and you want to edit that group, the permission sets you're looking for are down here toward the bottom. And there's one here, there are about 4. So create, update top container records, delete, bulk update top container records, create, update, delete container profile records, and create, update, delete location profile records. These are the four that kind of you have to be sure you can do to actually engage in all of this functionality. Something to consider is how broadly you should allow these permissions to be used by your staff. Clearly, create, update top container records, everybody should probably be able to do who you're having do data entry in ArchivesSpace. Everybody needs to be able to create a box record or a flat file record or something like that. The delete bulk update top container records is going to impact the functionality of the managed top containers section. And we'll show you that over the first half of the session. This is where you can engage in bulk actions on boxes or other containers. The create, update, delete container profiles. Again, this is the section that governs what size your containers are. Depending on your policies around how you build these out, you may want to limit this to only certain individuals. This is one of those areas you may not want it to be a free-for-all. You want to make sure that you're creating these records fairly consistently. Same thing with managing location profiles. Again, this probably shouldn't be a free-for-all. It should probably be build it out once and be done with it, and then tweak it as need be if you change your shelving out and your shelves get wider or shorter or something like that. So these should probably, the container profile and location profiles should probably be a little bit more tightly managed and not available to absolutely everybody. But clearly that would be an institutional policy decision for each of you, how to handle those. But these are where they are. Now, the other thing to kind of point out, this is a bit more conceptual. In managing space, as I mentioned before when we were looking at the chart, the system is basically doing math. And the degree to which its math is any good is entirely dependent on the numbers that you feed it. And it can only be as precise as you are precise in putting those numbers into the system. So for the system to work well, you need to track things granularly, with granularity. So you really need to track individual boxes to individual shelves. It is entirely reasonable to have in ArchivesSpace and possible to say that, this component spans boxes 1 through 3. And I've done that myself many times, and that's entirely fine. But how do you make a container profile for boxes 1 through 3? How many times do you need to do that? You really need to put the container profile to say, this is a document box. It's 5 inches wide by 8 inches high and 12 inches long, something like that. You need to actually declare the individual box sizes. Same thing with your storage locations. It's perfectly reasonable and possible to do in ArchivesSpace to build out a location that simply goes to a column. And again, I've done that myself on many occasions, with the presumption that if I can get someone to the column, they can scan the column and find the box. And so I did that for a long time. And I even tried building out space based on a column, saying it's like, maybe the system, if I just say it's a super long shelf, maybe that will work. Well, it doesn't really, because oftentimes when boxes are on a shelf, they don't completely fill it up. There might be 2 to 3 inches of space on each shelf. But if the system thinks it's one big long shelf, what happens is it thinks that you have a foot of available space there, when in fact what you have is 2 inches on each shelf that's not really usable. So it just doesn't work. And that's where the precision needs to come in, and why it's important to potentially, again, to track individual boxes to individual shelves. And that's how we built it out in here in the test case. The other thing to be aware of is that the system is pretty smart in many ways, but it doesn't, unless you specifically tell a system that a box is actually that is shared. So say, for example, you have an accession record for a collection and you have a finding aid for the collection. The box 1, so you can have instances and top containers in both of those. So maybe your accession record says you have boxes 1 through 10, and your finding aid says there are boxes 1 through 10, and they happen to be the same box. The system doesn't know they're the same box unless you tell it that it's the same box. I'm going to show you an example of one of these. And again, not knowing that it's the same box can impact managing space. I'm actually going to show let's see. I always have trouble bringing this one up because I don't have my character thing handy to grab the accented letter. Well, this is a good case. This is a case, for example, let me point this out, where in our test bed, we have an example of a translation finding aid. So we have a version in English and a version in Spanish. It's the same collection, and so it has the same boxes. If I look this one up, and this is a little preview of some of the manage top containers section, when I look it up, since I'm searching by keyword, I'm actually pulling up both finding aids at once. And if I sort it by the indicator numbers, I've got box one. It's the same collection, but it doesn't know they're the same box. And so I could, if they're both assigned to the same location, the system doesn't know, and it will think that instead of just one box, it will manage space based on the assumption that there are two boxes here, which will have an impact on how much space it thinks that you have available. I will show you later how to handle a situation like this to make sure that the system knows that you have a duplicate, or that these two box ones are in fact the same box. So I'll show you how to handle that in a little bit, but it's something to be aware of going in. The other thing to be aware of, and this question has come up in the past about managing containers and space, is does the system, how prescriptive is it? If I have a shelf and I go out there and look at it and say I have a set of boxes on the shelf, but I've got like a 3-inch gap between the top of the boxes and the beginning of the next shelf, can I, and the system says there's no space here, could I still put a flat box across the top of my document boxes to take advantage of that, extra little gap of space? Because I'm desperate for space, I need to put boxes wherever I can put them. The answer is yes. The system, even if it says when we're all done at the end of the day that you don't have space available someplace, you can still walk up there and say, wait a minute, I can put a flat box across the top. The system is smart, but it's not perfect. And so you can kind of physically override that, and it won't prevent you from doing it. That's both a positive and a negative, because you can accidentally assign more things there than will literally fit and make a mistake, and the system won't catch it for you. But the positive is that if all the calculations are a little off, you can still put whatever you need to put wherever you need to put it. That's a lot of initial ground to cover. Are there any immediate questions at this point? Okay, and I'll let Brittany jump in if any pop up, but we'll see how a lot of this plays out over the rest of our session today. So let's go ahead and jump into instances and top containers, just on principle. So, I'm sorry, my apologies. I'm getting over a cold, so I have a bit of a cough. I apologize. I'm trying to keep that to a minimum if I can. So in this case, I've got a small collection, got some series I'm fleshing out, and I have some files of correspondence, and I want to declare boxes or create boxes or containers for them. So again, for those who I'm not sure what the range of experience of everybody who's attending is, so if you already know this, please bear with me for a second. So Where we do this, again, as a reminder, is down here in the instances. The idea of the descriptive information at the top is this should be the intellectual description of what this material is. And then we use the instances to say, here's where you're going to go find this material. And that's why the order of things on this page is the way it is. We're referencing the intellectual description of the material, and then as a second stage, saying, here's where it is. Under instances, we could create a link to a digital object, or in this case, we're going to add the physical instance. This is the box you're going to pull for the reading, or the flat file, or the whatever it is, the painting hanging on the wall. And so that's why we come down here. So I'm going to add a container instance, and note we're using language of top container. And again, common question is, why don't you just call it a box? Well, it's meant to be broader than that. So if we called it a box, everybody would say, well, where do I enter my flat file? Where do, or my my oversized box, or my whatever it is. So again, this is meant to be sort of the outermost container that you might pull for a reading room. Within this top container, you might have folders. You might have, it might be an artifact box. And so there might be a box and it might have a number of objects in it. Your top container might be a microfilm reel, and your child might be the frames on the reel. There's grandchildren because you could have a box. You could have as folders within the box. And potentially, if it's really important material, you might even have like an item within the folder, within the
Nancy,
box. Yes,
can you maximize the window?
let me try that. Let me see. Oops. Is that better?
It should be.
Okay.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Okay. Let me start fleshing some of this out a little bit. And I'm going to build one. This is a required field. Usually these entries are taken from they're supposed to be taken from marked leader fields. There's some weird stuff in here, probably because when these collections were imported, there were some outliers. And so, but these should be based on marked leader fields. And typically mixed materials tends to cover archival stuff, but it could also be graphic materials, whatever's appropriate. So at this point, I'm actually going to create a top container. And because this collection doesn't have any associated with it, if some already existed, I could use browse, or I could simply use the type ahead. I'll show you that in a moment. But I'm going to create this. And this is where you declare what kind of container it is. A box, it might be a flat file folder, could be a reel, but this is where you contain it. And you simply need an indicator. If you had a barcode, you could add that. If you knew where this box was going to live, you could add a location at this point. Often that's not the case. Often you're processing as you go. You don't necessarily know for sure where the box is going to live on the shelf yet. And so this is why we'll show the manage top containers section later, which is where you can bulk update some of this information. You can also bulk update container profiles later. If you happen to know what it is and you already have them built out in the system, you can, I can do, and I have some in the system. So I could simply say that this is a document box, or I could say it's a storage carton, a banker's box, whatever it is. I could assign that at this point. I'm not going to right now, but this is where you could do it as you go. So all you really have to have is an indicator. Probably a good idea to have a container type, but the only thing that's really required is the indicator. If I create a link, the system does now know that this box 1 is associated with this collection. The system is smart enough to know that box 1 in this collection is different than box 1 in all of the other collections. So you don't have to worry about that. It does know it. Again, there are ways to share boxes across collections, but right now, this box is here. And if I save the object, here it is. I could come back because, oops, maybe I forgot to add my folders. So I could say this is a box, and this particular one has 1 through 4. Object. I could do this again and add container, material. Now that I've already created a box 1, I can continue to use it in the system. It knows it's the same box. All I have to do is I can start doing a type ahead. It knows there's a box 1. It knows it's already the one that's already been used in this collection. I can simply assign it. I could then say, this is folders 5 to 8. And I could keep going. So let's say I have materials, and I'm going to intentionally make a little bit of a mistake. Let's say I'm in a hurry. This should actually be box 2, but I'm accidentally making it box 1. It's folders 3, and I'm going to save it. And so I go back and I say, oops, I made a mistake. This is supposed to be box 2. This is something to watch out for. In this case, the correct way to fix this is not to edit box 1. If I go in, I can view this top container. And when you view it, it's showing that these are all the things this particular box is assigned to. If I edit box 1, it changes it for everything it's assigned to. So that, that's a handy thing to know if you really need to change it. But especially if you have an intellectual finding aid and that box 1 is scattered all over and you made a mistake, you could do yourself some damage. So be careful about editing. You can do it, but be careful. The best way to do this, sorry, I'm just getting rid of the screen here, is to actually remove this, the little X here, and create the box 2. Does that make sense? Be careful, and once I save it, if I had edited that number to be box 2, all of these box 1s would have updated to be box 2. So just watch that a little bit. Now, I'm going to come back to this one briefly. And I want to say that something to be aware of also is notice you can add multiple container instances. Why would you do that? The reason you can do that is because you may need, let's say, for this particular folder, and again, this is the description, this is correspondence from 1846 to 1860, and it's in folders 1 through 4, but let's say there was an oversize item. And so we need to say, if you want to pull back the entirety of the correspondence from 1846 to 1860, you actually need to pull box 1, folders 1 through 4, but maybe you also need to pull back a flat file, and this is flat file 1 in this collection, or flat file 10, something like that. So to pull back all of it, you might need to pull both of these things. You could also have a third one. So let's say back in the day when people were always microfilming everything that wasn't tied down, maybe this collection went out and it was scanned to microfilm. And so we could say microform. We could create a This could be a reel, and it could be in your overall collection, it's reel 256. And maybe the frames on this reel are to does that make sense? This is why you might have multiple. You're trying to reflect the various containers in which this intellectual core, this content can be found, what you might have to pull. So it could be that these are places you need to pull back. This is how it displays in here. Any questions about creating top containers?
Hi, Nancy. So we have a question. Is there a way to link a single top container to multiple resource records, as in the case of multiple archival collections held in a single box, shared box?
Yes. So let's say I have my reel here, and I'm going to jump to another collection. And let's say, where's one that would have, okay, I'm going to pull up this one because I think it has some things that are not assigned. So here I have a thing, and let's say this has been captured. It's also on microfilm. It's in a different collection. I'm going to go down to instances. I'm going to add a container instance. Go to that microform. And in this case, I'm going to use browse. Do you use browse to find a top containers? Let's say I know it's out there. But because, oops, let me get out of this for 1 second. Because it's not already associated with this collection, I can't type ahead to find it. What I can do, I think, what did I say? It was 256. Oh. It can't find it because there's not already an association, but I know that my microfilm reel is out there. So this is again where I will use browse, and it automatically wants to populate to search within the boxes and the resource that's open. But you don't have to do that. Handy thing to do would be like a keyword to try and find it, or if you know that it's in a different collection. In this case, it was in Corelli. And I could search for all the theoretically. Oh, it did that even though it did it without even me having to hit search. The minute I selected it, I got the 4 results. If you scroll down, there they are. Here's my reel or my flat file 10. I could actually link this one. I could link whichever one I need. And so you can pull it up. If you want to see how it looks when you do that, I'm going to bounce over quickly to the Manage Top Containers section. And I'm actually going to pull up and so here's a case of, here's my reel. Because I used a keyword, the number 256 is probably somewhere in this collection. So that's why it's showing up, even though it's not obvious on the surface. But this is how this top one here is how this displays when a box is linked to multiple collections. They could both be resources, could be a resource accession combination. It could be used across 10 different collections, but each dot signifies the collection that it's used within. So that's how that looks. Does that help answer that question? Do you need me to show that again?
That's perfect. Thank you. We did have a question about container profile. So it
Oh,
was asking if ArchivesSpace had any predefined container profiles. And
I don't believe that they come predefined. Because I think in most cases people need to make their own. Even document boxes, like Hollinger boxes, things like that, even those sometimes can differ in their sizes by, a half inch in width. On occasion, sometimes they're legal, sometimes there's letter. And of course, this is not functionality that everybody wants to use. So I don't think they come predefined. But they are not difficult to make, and we're going to get to that pretty shortly. Actually, we're doing pretty well on time. So we will get to container profiles and how to create them in a minute. Before I move away from creating top containers generally, any other questions on that? The next thing I'm going to show you is how to import top containers in bulk to a collection that may not have them.
we did have a question about the drawers and top containers versus drawers as locations. And we can save that if needed.
Brittany, would you rather handle that as part of locations, or would you like me to speak to it now?
I can handle it.
Okay.
So we'll get
that
to
makes
that
sense.
in the second half.
Yeah, we will get there. So let me, I'm going to come over and I'm going to show you a bit of functionality about the bulk import of containers. This is described in the ArchivesSpace help documentation. There's a pretty detailed chart of what the fields mean, etc. But I'm at least going to show you briefly an example of how to do this. And this should work. I've tested it out in advance, perils of live demos, so to speak, but we should be okay. So this is actually a little Getty finding aid that I loaded in. And I'm going to come over here and view this. And so what happens for a number of institutions sometimes is either they don't have top containers or they've inherited a situation in which the container was actually made part of the hierarchy, the intellectual hierarchy. So instead of saying this, it might have said box 1, box 2, box 3 over here. And the actual instances weren't used. Now, that's technically possible, but having that kind of structure makes it impossible to use all kinds of other functionality in the system. So this bulk import was was created to help people manage this kind of situation. So what it does, the way that it works, is if you come over to here to export for any resource, there's a download container template. And all you have to do is click it. And what it will do is, depending on how your browser behaves, it's trying to do this download. And here it's done. And I'm going to open this up. It brings it out in CSV. And what it does is effectively export your entire list, a container list, or a hierarchy list. So these can be long. And it pre-populates it with as much information as it can to enable you to re-import this with the information that you need. So the things that come out, and then it provides the additional fields for the information you might want to add. And I've already built out one of these, so I'll show you what it looks like rather than taking the time here to necessarily do that. So this is the ref ID, the component ID in the system, if there
Nancy,
is one. Yes.
can you go through getting that spreadsheet again?
Sure. Let me get rid of this. I'm going to close it. I'm not going to save changes. And so I'm at the top level of this finding aid. And I'm over here under export. And right here, download container template. And all you have to do is click it. and it will go wherever your browser tends to send these things. Again, just open it up, and there are a number of fields that you would need to fill in. Again, the detailed instructions on what is expected here are on the ArchivesSpace help pages. So this is what natively comes out. I'm going to go ahead and close this, and I'm going to open a version that I've already fleshed out a little bit. So bear with me. And so this is what came out. One thing to pay attention to is that any line that you don't need to use, you should remove from the spreadsheet. So for example, this is a chunk of hierarchy. I don't actually want to assign a box number to it. It comes, actually, this is here. You can see that it came out in this. This is this top. And in this case, because when I import it, I only want to import the things I actually want to assign a top container to, I would actually remove this line and not fill something in for it, which is what I've done over here. And again, these details, I'm gonna have to cover this fairly quickly here, but all of this kind of information is on the ArchivesSpace help page. So what I've done here to fill this out is these are images. These are actually extremely rare photographs. So this is an occasion where we did actually do item level description of it. That's not a common thing, but that you'll get the point. So the way to fill it in is graphic materials, and where this information can be found is in sometimes the I'm over in ArchivesSpace in system, the controlled value lists, and you want the system number, the system fields for this. So in this case, I want, where did I find the right way to enter mixed materials or graphic materials? That's in the instance type. And what you want to fill in, there's a value and a translation. When you are filling in this particular spreadsheet, you're actually populating backend data tables. And so you want the value because that's what the backend data tables want. The translation is the pretty human readable form of it, but this is what it looks like in the back end. And so this is the version that you want to fill in this spreadsheet. In this case, graphic materials with the underscore and no caps. But were mixed materials, same thing. So if you're in doubt about what that backend data table wants, this is where you go. It's the system controlled value lookup lists, and you can view them here. So that's what I filled in. In this case, its container type is a box. The indicator is the box number. So I filled that in. And in this case, we did item level description because again, they're very rare photographs. So it was, each box had like 11 oversized prints in it. And in this case, I have container profiles filled out. So I'm telling it what container profile to use. The number is the ID. And let me show you where that ID comes from. Again, so we're sort of previewing collection container profiles a little bit. But if you're in here, if you select one of these and view it, yeah, this was the right one. You see this number up here in the URI? Here's the 7. That's the number it's looking for. So if you know that in this case, it was a 2-inch flat box, 9 by 11, this is where you find that number. If it were a different collection, this one is number 4. And that's the number that I'm filling in here. You don't have to. If you don't know what the size of the box is, if you don't want to look it up, you don't have to include this. Location works the same way. If you know the location, you'd find the ID. And if you have a location record, you have it open. Again, the ID is the number that's up here. You could choose to fill this in at the same time, but you don't have to. So this I have filled in, and let me show you how to import it. Save it because I didn't actually make any changes. So let me go back to my finding aid, and I've filled in all this information with the right box and folder or item numbers or whatever you need. And then come back to this. And this is where I would use, and I'm up here sort of at the top level, this load via spreadsheet. And there are a number of options. In this case, we're going to select link top containers. And I'm going to select the file. And in this case, I've got training. Here's my file. I'm going to open it. It's here now. If I want to test it to make sure it's going to work, I could simply hit only validate. It will run through the process to verify that everything will work or not. And if it fails, then you can go back and correct things. So we'll give you some heads up. And in this case, again, kind of through the interests of want to make sure that we have enough time. Well, actually, I think we have enough time. So let me just try it. I've got the only validate clicked. So I'm going to go ahead and click import. It won't actually import it. It's just going to test it. And what it's going to do is open a background job and start running this. And I'm not sure. Why it's not. I swear to God, I ran this before. Both an EADID and a URI. One second, let me test mine. This should work. Did I hit the wrong button? One second. Maybe I validated against the wrong thing. That'd be funny. Yep. That was the problem. This was highlighted, import archival objects. And so it said, I can't do that because I forgot to actively click the link top containers. So let me, I'm going to have to redo that. And this time I'm going to actively click it and make it blue. Only validate. Select the file again. Load it in. This should behave a little better. And it's giving me a little report. Oh. Well, it gives you a little report that for some reason doesn't want to open right now. But it worked and it didn't fail. You saw earlier when I ran the other one, when it failed, you saw the error report that comes through. So when it fails, it's fairly obvious. And I actually have to reload it. I can't just unclick, only validate and rerun it. I have to reload it. That's how it works. Link top containers, select file. And once it loads, this time I'll actually import it. And it's looking like it's adding a bunch of stuff. This all looks good. I refresh the page and scroll down. It's saying that all of these archival objects were now modified. So I can click on any one of them to go over to it, or I can simply close out these background jobs. I can come back to my finding aid. I can close this. And all I have to do is I hit the drop down, here they are. And this is a lot better than trying to go in and edit each of these components one by one to add them individually. There isn't a way to bulk create and add a container to archival objects. It has to be done within the context of the archival object, kind of one by one. So when you are creating your inventory, if you can add the box number while you're going, for the box or other container information while you're going, it's a much better way to do it. You cannot use this functionality, the spreadsheet, to edit these box numbers. So it's good for loading them, and I think you'll even see there's even a warning about that in your handout for the quick start guide. I think we even have a warning about that down toward the bottom, which is you can't edit a top container using this, and you can't otherwise change the archival object. So you can import them, but it's not editing. If you needed to really edit something, you'd actually have to delete all the top containers in the collection and reload them all, which I've done, but you definitely want to be careful when you do that. Questions about the spreadsheet or loading?
Can you use the spreadsheet to import instances into accession records?
As far as I know, you can. I haven't tried that. I don't think you can, because what it's trying to match against are actually the archival objects. So you wouldn't probably, I don't know of a way to import a string of instances or top containers to an accession. I think this is really more used. There's not even a template to download in an accession record that will enable you to do that. In this case, again, we're basing it off this template that we're actually downloading through this. It's based off the archival objects. So I don't think you can.
So is there any way to import bulk instances into an accession record?
Let me think about that. I wouldn't rule out potentially being able to use the API somehow.
Yeah, I'm not sure of it either.
But yeah, I don't know of a way through this staff interface, the front end, to do that. I would be hesitant to say that it's totally impossible, though. If you start working with the API, something might be possible there.
Yes, and someone mentioned there is a plugin for creating top containers for an accession. So look into that plugin. I'm not aware of it.
The plugin on the ArchivesSpace GitHub, or would it be on a link through the what I'm blanking on the name of the it's not my ArchivesSpace, it's
ArchivesSnake.
something like that, yeah.
Yeah, can someone share where that plugin is located? Because I have not heard of that.
Always a good idea to keep an eye out for plugins. So yeah.
ArchivesSnake is a group. Someone asked what ArchivesSnake is. It's a GitHub that people add plugins to for ArchivesSpace. Okay, so the Bentley Historical Libraries GitHub has a bulk container. And the link has been shared in the chat.
Thank you.
There was a question that is going to be answered during locations because they asked, can you bulk import locations for top containers if the top containers already exist in ArchivesSpace? And it's like they know what we're going to do. So we will get to that question during the second half of the workshop. And that's all the questions for now.
All right. So let me move on to actually start looking at container profiles. And I think we're moderately on schedule. I think we're actually not doing too bad. So we're going to jump over and, ideally, all of this is set up so that when you are working in ArchivesSpace, your container profiles are there. So when you're making boxes, you can just add them along the way. But let's face it, a lot of us aren't there. Or we started using the system and we're now building the stuff out further. So we're going to start diving into some of this a little bit more detail. I've already built out some in here. And a couple of things to look at. We're gonna walk through an existing one that I've built out, and then we're gonna create a new one. And so just to start with, I'm gonna open up. Let's say this is a legal document box. Let's say this is like consider this like roughly a standard Hollinger. These only bounce back. Make container profiles. There is a view and an edit mode. And if you're in view, just to point out, this just shows the raw detail. We'll come back to this space calculator at the very end. Once everything, but I'm just going to point out since I'm here that this is one of the two places in the system where you can find this. The idea being that if you knew you had a, whatever you want to call it, a document box or let me go back to a different one, legal document box. So if you had a Hollinger box, whatever you want to call it, you have one and you want to know where there is space on your shelf to put this. This is one of the places where you can look up that particular size box and then go see and calculate, and the system will show you where there's space on your shelves for this specific size of box. And then you could go put it there and then track that location in your finding aid. So this is one of the places where you can do it. Notice it only appears here on the view screen. If you're in edit mode, now you do see it. There was a time when you didn't, but now you do see it. So I was wrong. I learn something every time I do this. I'm actually going to So in here, I've got, and one of the things to consider when making these, I'm going to bounce back out, is how do you want to name your different containers? Do you have like particular, in this case, it's a letter document box. Other people might refer to them as a Hollinger box. They might call them something else. A flat file, one institution may call it a flat file. One other institution might call it a map folder. Might call it a binder. It might have different ways. Record storage carton could be a banker's box or a double-sized banker's box. What do you want to call them? How do you want them to sort? You can sort them in different order by title, but there's not many sort options. So how do you want to name things so that you'll know what it is, so that your staff can find, and when they're out working in the finding aid, can easily find the size box they're looking for. In this case, I have two 3-inch tall flat boxes. One is 13 by 17 inches. One is 21 by 25 inches. And so I was trying to figure out ways and give people a couple options for recognizing the size box that they have and being able to find it. For calculation purposes, I actually entered the dimensions. You'll actually go over here. I entered the dimensions of this box in feet. So this is something you can do. What's your overall name? What dimensions do you want the system to use when calculating and doing the math? Could be centimeters, meters, inches, feet. You know, you can come up with something different if you needed to. If you have a primary dimension, you have to select what it is. Are you primarily saying, how wide is this box? How much width does it take up on my shelf? How tall is it? What is the primary dimension that you want the system to use if it's calculating linear feet? Clearly, if it's something is calculating cubic feet, it needs to take all of these dimensions into account. But if it's counting linear feet, just the length of something, do you want that calculation to be based on the depth of the box, the height, or the width? Often it's the width. So I declared that here. And because I do sort of want things to calculate as feet more than inches, I'm defaulting to my 3-inch tall flat box, which is 13 by 17. You know, 3 inches tall. The height is 0.25 feet. And so I'm entering them in feet. The stacking limit, how many of these boxes can I stack on top of each other? The system can help do the math in that regard. So I have 3-inch flat boxes. Maybe because they're heavy, I only want to stack them 3 high. Maybe I have a shelf that's shorter and I can only stack them 3 high. Or maybe I can say 4 if I wanted to. But this gives the system some indication. And so one thing you'll notice if you were watching earlier, I actually made a little bit of change. I've got notice here there's a stacking limit 0. That's not, unless this has changed, that's not totally recommended. It's probably better to either leave it blank or to put 1. We're not totally sure if the system knows entirely what to do with 0. So if it's just a case of this where you're not going to stack them, I'd either leave it blank or put it as 1 and save that for a while. Just to be on the safe side. So this is what some of them look like. And this is, for example, I'm going to build out, say I have a binder. And in this particular case, I have a binder. I'm actually using inches in this regard. And it's 13 inches deep, it's 12 inches high, and it's 2 inches wide. Well, let's say I have another binder and it's 4 inches wide. So I want to build, well, actually, maybe I have 2 other kinds of binders. And I want to, one's 3 inches and one's 4 inches. Remember earlier I was talking about the need to be granular? You do need to be granular. So if you've got binders that are markedly different sizes, you may need a couple of binder sizes in here. But we also need to live in the real world, frankly. If something's only a 1/2 inch different, you can really get into the weeds with building out these container profiles. You have a lot of custom boxes, a lot of very minor changes between boxes. What you might need to do is build out your 3-inch flat box that's, 13 by 17. But if you have a 3-inch box that's 12 by 16 inches, you may just have an internal policy in which you say, I'm going to have some stock box sizes in here. If something falls between these two, round it up to the next one. So if I had a box, if I had something like a 3-inch flat box that was 9 by 11, and I had a 13 by 17 3-inch flat box, but again, my box was 12 by 16 inches, I may just choose to select this and say this is close enough, because it can get out of control. I would recommend rounding up rather than rounding down, because then at least your box will fit in that space. It's not perfect. It gets a little bit away from the precise granularity, but again, we have to live in the real world. And so a little bit of rounding here is sometimes necessary. But you'll internally, for each of your repositories, you'll want to kind of stop and think about how granular you need to be. Where I am, I think we have 118 different container profiles. We have a lot of custom, and that doesn't even include all of the custom boxes that we have. So we do have a policy of like rounding up to the next closest if it's within an inch. So something to consider. So let's go ahead and build one. So I've got here, you can create a new container profile. And I'm going to do a binder. We change binder. I'm going to capitalize it. And in this case, I am going to use inches. I'm worried about the width. How wide is it on my shelf? So the depth, this one might also be 13. This one might be 12 inches tall, and it's 3 inches wide. And I'm not going to stack it. It's just going to be one. You could use a note. Sometimes people will, for this note field, you might put in like a link to where you order this particular box or binder from. So if you want to order it again in the future, like here was your vendor, here was the link to the actual product or something, you could use it for this. If you could, but you could also use it for any other note. It's pretty generic. And notice here, I've got save container profile and +1. So if you're making a bunch of container profiles, one after the other, the +1 will help, it will save it and it will start a new one. So for example, if I hit this is what it does. And it created a container profile and it should have opened up a new one. I'm just going to double check. Watch it. The idea is that it's supposed to immediately move you on to create a new one that sort of uses this as a baseline. So I'm going to actually edit this to help clarify that this is my 2-inch. And the reason that I'm doing that is because I'm kind of paying attention to how these sort. Notice that the binder comma 3-inch before appeared above the binder when it was just plain. You can still see this width over here, but I'm trying to get some of these to sort in an order that's easier to look through. So if I go through, I'm doing a type ahead and I'm adding a binder, I can see it's a 2-inch versus a 3-inch. If I want to create another one, I could say and maybe this is a little bigger. It's 14 and 13 and 1. And now I'm adding them in. Any questions about creating a top container? I'm sorry, top container profile. Apologies, container profile.
No, so we do have some questions.
Okay.
So if you, for like the stacking limit, if you do stack but not consistently, is there a recommendation for what to put in the stacking limit?
I would put in the stacking limit the maximum amount that you would ever want to stack. It doesn't mean that you have to stack that high. So again, if things are particularly fragile or something, the system may tell you there's room to put something there. That doesn't mean you have to do it. But I would say for the system, I would probably say that give it the maximum stacking that you might ever want to do.
And then someone has a large AV collection with VHS cassettes and DVDs on the shelves, but not in boxes. What are some approaches in that situation?
Probably would need to actually build a profile. And certainly like AV tapes can come in different sizes. So again, you may want to take some standard sizes midway with rounding might come in a little bit, and build out a couple of sizes of audio cassettes, DVD containers as well. So you may just want to build it, because in that sense, if you're listing them individually in your finding aid, you'd want to assign this profile to them. So in that case, you would make a profile that might be very small. It might be case, again, could potentially have a couple different sizes. Inch, it might be width. It could be your width is half an inch, so 0.5. Your height might be, I don't know if it's a standard case or like an extra tall one. So maybe I'm just going to make something up. Maybe your height is 6 inches and maybe your depth is 4. See what I mean? If they're not stacked, then you could either leave it blank or do 1. And so you might need DVT case, and again, you might need a couple different sizes of flat files, not flat files, audio, AV tapes.
Yeah, and that
So
will
there's a
come in.
U-matic or a VHS or a beta. You have to decide again how far in the weeds you want to go on that.
Mhm.
But that's how you can do it.
Thank you. Yeah, I would say if you're really into calculating your extent in space, you're going to need to like calculate for all of those. Like,
Yes.
And then there was another question. If you edit a container profile, will this update all the instances it's attached to?
Yep. So if you go through, this is another place where you want to kind of watch those permissions a little bit. Because if someone says, oh, well, I have a box, but it's a ½ inch difference. So let me go in and change this and edit it. It will change it every place that it's used. So as we did with that box earlier, remember we had that box 1, box 2, and I said, if you edit box 1, you edit it every place. Similar principle here. If I go in and I say, oh, but my binder's 3½ inches, so let me edit this. It changes it every place. So if you need to get granular enough to distinguish a 3-inch binder from a 3½, you need 2 separate entries. Now, if one of these is a mistake and you need to update it, then it's great that it updates it every place. Like if you had a typo in here, and you just need to fix that, then it does edit that every place. So again, positive, negative.
Yeah, thank you. Can you create container profiles in bulk?
Not that I know of. The closest I've got is that +1 kind of thing. Because I'm not even totally sure function the way I was expecting it to. But yeah.
I don't know if there's not a spreadsheet for it, so no.
Yeah, not that I know of. Again, would I rule out something through the API? Not necessarily, but not through the front end that I'm moving up. Any other questions?
One
Or
other
shall I
question.
Okay.
If you have the same flat box, but sometimes store it with the narrow side out and sometimes with the wide side out, do you suggest to make 2 different profiles?
You could. I am a little, we have that problem where I'm a little wary of it. In those, just because it's so easy to reorient the box, and then you do have to go in and change the profile that's associated with it. What I'll admit I've been defaulting to is just taking the overall size of the box, and just sort of picking one. The only time I've really done this is if I've had occasions where I've seen binders that are actually stored on their side rather than vertically. And that makes a pretty big difference, especially if it's intended to be stored flat for some reason. So there I actually have sort of made 2. But say if it's one of these flat boxes, 9 by 11, and sometimes it's stored with the 9-inch out and sometimes with the 11-inch out, I usually just pick one, and I usually go with the whatever is most likely to be stored. If it's a 9 by 11, most likely I'm going to store it with the 9-inch side sticking out because that's going to give me more shelf space. I would say you're certainly welcome to do that, to make two different ones, and you can just again watch that. If you end up changing if someone just happens to walk through and change the orientation of the box on the shelf, do you need to update the profile?
Yeah, it takes a lot of effort to always be
Yeah.
updating that. I
Yes.
recommend width as well and keeping it that just because of space. Like if you're calculating for space, you don't want to think you have more space than you do.
Yeah.
We have two more questions currently. They keep coming in.
And,
Um,
actually, um, let's, I want to make sure because we're getting up on time and I just want to show manage top containers quickly and some of the functionality there. And I want to make sure we get to break somewhere on time. Are
yeah,
these questions that can wait just a little bit, or would it be better to answer them now?
I think we can wait until you're done.
Okay. So when we'll get to your questions, let me go over and we're going to look quickly at the manage top containers section, which is where you can do some of the bulk updating. And I always have to go back over here. Oh, here, I do have this one up. So this is the one I did earlier. So this section, let me just discuss how you can use this searching. Generally, if you have barcodes, you can look up things very specifically. Keyword. So in this case, I have got, and this is what I showed earlier, I've got two different collections that are Sanchez. I could use this identifier number as well. Depends on what you want to bring up. Keyword is more likely to bring up things across, say, for example, multiple resources, multiple accessions, resources and accessions. Searching in resource will just bring up a particular resource. And so in this case, I can select one of these or the other. I cannot select both. If I were to do this number appearing keyword, then it would bring up potentially both. Depends on what you want to do. Accession, again, you're just searching the accessions module, so you're only going to bring back fields from that. Container profile, you could bring back all boxes that had a container profile. And in many cases, again, you can go out and browse for one. Same thing, you could bring back all the boxes at a given location if you know what that location is. You can also bring up any containers that are not associated with a collection of any kind. They're basically orphaned in the system. This can happen if you round trip finding aids or sessions, or if you change things, you can end up with orphaned top containers that are sort of just lost in the system. And this is, if you search for yes, this is a good way to find them all and bulk delete them because again, they're not linked to anything. So it helps with data cleanup. You can also bring up all the collections that are or are not assigned to a location. So again, that might help you find outliers. So just some things to think about. And so in this case, I'm bringing up Sanchez, I want to bring up both of those collections. Again, this is a case where we have the same finding aid is in the system twice, one version in English, one version in Spanish. And this is a case where, again, I mentioned before that the system doesn't know that the boxes are shared, that it's really the same box in each case. So this is one case in box 2. I've gone ahead and I've merged them, and I'm going to show you how I did that in a minute. And so in this case, it knows that box 2 is the same thing. But before I get started, I'm actually noticing that this area should also be able to show you the location of each of those boxes. But what I've realized is that it's not coming out as the standard view. So let me show you how to make sure you can add that if it's not there. And what I want to do is we're going to come up here to admin, and I'm going to go to, these are like global preferences. And up here in the preferences, this is where you can declare what you want to show up on these different results screens. And so here I'm going to go down to top container management browse columns. And it shows series, which I don't actually need. So I'm going to edit some of these. These are all of the fields that are coming up by default on that browse screen we just saw. So I'm going to reorient these a little bit. Do container profile, type, indicator, barcode. I'm going to do internal note, and I'm going to add location. And then if I save these preferences, if I come back over to manage top containers, and it's been sticky, it remembers the last thing I searched for. Search for it again. If I scroll down now on this screen, notice things look a little different. Container profile, and now I've actually got the location showing up. I can sort by any of these fields simply by clicking. So if I want to sort everything by box versus real, I can do that. If I want to sort for all of the locations, if I click it one direction, it sorts it one way. If I then click on it again, it will sort it a different way. Container profile, click on it again, it will bring everything to the top or the bottom. Indicator. So you can sort of play around with this a little bit. If you click on the box next to resource accession, it highlights everything. Click on it again, it unhighlights everything. The big thing you can do here is with bulk operations. And by bulk operations, even if you only have one thing selected, you can still use bulk operations. You can also go in and just edit this top container right here. And then get out of that if you want to. You could also delete it at this point if you wanted to. So I'm going to go back over, however, here and search. So let's run through a few of the things that you can do. So let's say in this case, here are my two versions of the same finding aid. So this is the same box. And I want to tell the system that this is the same box. Right now, they're both assigned to the same location. So that location thinks there are two boxes sitting here, not just one. So I'm going to highlight both of these. Among my bulk operations, you can update ILS holdings IDs. You can update container profiles. You can update locations and indicator numbers. And in this case, we're going to merge the top containers. We're going to tell the system that these two boxes are the same thing. So I'm going to hit merge top, and I'm going to pick the one that I want to merge it into. There are usually instructions here. So we'll merge them. In this case, this second one has more information. It's a legal document box. The location's the same. So I'm going to pick that one because it's the most information bearing. And I'm going to select merge. Now, you can't undo it, but I'm okay with it. It's telling me I'm only dealing with two boxes. I was careful in what I selected. And I've selected the one, confirming the choice I made. And I'm going to say merge these two records. And you can see up here, it's spending, it's thinking about it. And I will say it took this a little while. Sometimes it's pretty quick. So I think of the way this is being hosted on the back end, this might take it a second, but it will go through. Actually, I think last time I did this in this particular best bet, it stalled out, but it did eventually go through. And while this is thinking about it, I'm actually going to jump away and pull this up again. 01764. still working on this. Other things you can do here. So for example, real, if I needed to, actually, let me do this. Let's say I have box 6 and box 7 and box 8. I've got number of these selected. We'll pretend, just for fun, we'll pretend that they're all different boxes, and I want to update the container profiles. So let's say all of these boxes, let's pretend they're all different, but they're all the same size box. So I can come in here and I can do type ahead, and let's say I just typed 3, and you can see it's highlighting what it's pulling it up based off. So it pulled this first box up because it spotted the 3 in the 3-inch flat box, and it spotted the 3 in the 13. So I could do that. I could say it's a 13, and it's pulling up everything that had a dimension of 13. So let's just say all of these boxes are 3-inch flat boxes. And I'm now going to update all 6 records. And it's going to work on it. That timed out. It did that before. And I think that's just because of how this is being hosted. And let me search. And eventually, I think this will come back. And actually, even though it timed out, I think it will show that it actually merged them. Just in case that it doesn't for some reason, this example is what it would look like. It's got the 2 versions of the finding aid, and they're both pointing at box 2. Again, I did this over the weekend when I was setting some of this stuff up, and it did take a little while to come back, even though I was getting timeout errors. And that should not happen with your normal instances. I think that's just an artifact here. And eventually, search again. Here they are. Sometimes it takes a little bit to come back. So I've now updated these in bulk. If I needed to delete boxes in bulk, I could do that. So say for whatever reason, these don't exist anymore, I could actually come in and delete these top containers. And it's going to give me the option to verify that I really want to do this. In this case, I won't, so I can cancel out of it. And we're right up against your break time. Do you want to take a break now, or do you want me to just finish quickly with, hopefully you're getting the sense of what you can do with some of the managed top container section. Do you want me to show you very quickly how to calculate extents? It's fairly quick. What do you think, Brittany? Should we take 5 minutes into the break and then extend the break by 5 minutes, or come back after break?
We do have a few questions, so maybe go into the break a few minutes.
Okay, so let me very quickly just show the calculate extent. So once you have all of these container profiles built, once you've assigned them to something, and I have an example of that built out in here. So this is the Krispy Kreme records. And in this case, I've actually fleshed this out pretty consistently. These are all 1 here for an example purposes that is not assigned to a container size. If I go into browse resources, I'm going to pull up the Krispy Kreme, and you can do this in either view or edit mode. So I'm in this record. This is one I've assigned location profiles, container profiles, pretty much everything. If I go to this more section, and I will say you can do this at the main level, it will also do it at the series level. So you can calculate it all the way down at each level of hierarchy if you need to, but there is a calculate extent. And so if I do that, the system is doing the math for me. So in this case, it's calculating things in linear feet. It's showing me I've got one that doesn't have a profile, And what I'm going to do is go in and add that, show you how it will change. And do this easily. Open another window. Go back to the manage top containers. First page. And in this case, I could sort. If it hadn't already sorted, I could sort to bring my floater up to the top. I can just edit this one. In this case, I'm going to actually say that this is a binder. And I'm going to start typing ahead. Here's a binder. Notice this one, I'm actually, everything else was calculated in feet. I'm adding something that's calculated in inches. I'm going to save it. Coming back over here, I'm just going to refresh this. And now if I calculate it again, calculate extent, now it knows everything. In this particular case, notice everything is measured by feet, except this binder, which is in inches. And in this case, it calculated the feet for you. And so the overall size is 22.65 linear feet. And I can, because I did it in view, it's just a preview. If I close this and I do it in edit, same place, more, calculate extent. What it's doing is it created an extent record for me. I can then add this to the finding aid. Now, in this case, this particular finding aid already had like an estimated extent in here. And this is the new one. I can choose which one I want to keep, or I could edit them. So I could choose to get rid of this one and just keep the one that the system calculated for me and save the resource. And again, I could do this at the series level, and it can do the same thing. Just as a point of interest, let me show you one other one. And again, I'm calling out specifically the fact that this was a mixed inches collection. The system doesn't always calculate it in feet. So I'm going to pull up this particular collection, and I have a few things in here that are also a mixed set of, calculate extent. And in this case, I've got two binders that are measured in inches, and I've got a flat box that's measured in feet. This time it calculated it in inches. I will admit I have not had a chance to sleuth out why sometimes it calculates in inches and sometimes in feet. I suspect it's because it's counting maybe based on the bulk of the containers that it's measuring. So in this case, I've got two binders that are two containers that are measured in inches and one that's measured in feet. So maybe that's why it's defaulting to measuring in inches. In the other case, the vast majority of the containers were measured in feet, and I only had one that was being measured in inches. That one calculated in feet. So just watch this if you have different sizes in the system. And in this case, it didn't have a type in the system for linear inches, so it didn't try to fill it in. Before there was one for linear feet, so it did fill that in. Just something to be aware of if you have container profiles that are a mix of measurements in feet or inches. So that's that. Any questions at this point? And I am 5 minutes into our break, and I do apologize. And again, I'm open to, we can either come back at the very end to ask questions. I don't want to take time away from Brittany, or if there are any immediate questions to clarify anything.
So going back to container profiles, when you're creating them, what is the function of the URL field?
This might also be a place where, again, could be a note where I mentioned maybe something you're ordering from a vendor. I think what you could also put in here would be, again, the intent was as the tool over thing notes, hyperlink for an external description of the container, and it could be where you put the link to the place where you order it or the vendor, but you could also use that for the note. That's what it could be used for.
Okay, thank you. Can you use calculate extent for multiple collections together?
Right now, certainly not in that sense. You could, it's really meant to be collection by collection or elements within. You could look at the reports and then maybe try to, because there are reports and custom reports templates. You could try and see if you could calculate holding, across multiple collections using reports or custom report templates possibly. I also, if you're pulling out data using the API, I actually run Crystal reports against ArchivesSpace, and so I write all sorts of reports that pull this size information out and the extents and do calculations based on that as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I don't know of any other way besides that to do it. And then are you able to import container profiles per product name? Example, 3mm pocket folder, 12Z, etc. Or would you have to create these?
That goes back to the imports, and again, unless you're using maybe the API in some fashion, there's not a way to import that. So like you wouldn't go out to a vendor site and like import the information from the vendor site. I think in this case you have to manually enter all of that and then fill in the dimensions. One thing to watch when making these container profiles is when you're measuring them, measure the external dimensions of the box. Sometimes if you go to vendor sites, the dimensions they give you are of the internal usable space of the box. And that's great, but it doesn't help you with space management, because for space management, you need to know the outermost dimensions of the box because that's the shelf space it takes up. So if you are working with vendor information in terms of box sizes, just watch what it's measuring, internal dimensions or external. But going back to your import question, and other than maybe API, and I'm a little speculative on that, there's not an import ability for container profiles. Feel free to build a plugin.
Last question. Is there a way to set a preference to always convert to linear feet when you're calculating extent?
There may be. I think that would be in the, there's a config file. So you'd have to work, so if you're hosting someplace, you'd have to work with your hosting provider, or you'd have to go into the config file sort of on the server. And I believe there is a way to set in that config file whether you're calculating based on cubic feet, linear feet, centimeters or other things. But I believe you can edit that. You simply cannot do it through the front end staff interface. It would be a back end config file change.
Yeah, that's the only way I know of it. And there are some recordings from Atlas systems on using the config file if you're interested in how that works. You should be able to find those on YouTube. So that's the last question for now. If you do have any more questions about any of this, we can get to those after the break or at the end, but we're going to take a 10-minute break. So everyone please be back at like 50 after the hour because it's currently 1:40.
All right, yeah, at 50, not at, yeah, that's right. Sorry, I was like, isn't that an hour from now? No, okay, so yeah,
No.
back in 10 minutes.
Yes, back in 10 minutes at, let's say 51. So whatever time it is there, 51 after the hour. So see you all soon.
Thank you.
Okay. So now we're going to start talking about locations. So you're going to be hearing my voice from this part of the training, and how this ties into containers will hopefully become obvious, but we will discuss that. So first things first, we're going to create what are called, give me 1 second, location profiles. So a location profile is an optional feature that can define the physical dimensions and capacity of a location within ArchivesSpace. It's used in conjunction with the container profile record. So this optional functionality will support calculations to identify available shelving locations for containers. So in order to best calculate how much space you have, you need to have both used container profile records, so attach those to your top containers, and then in your locations have created a location profile, which will give dimensions and physical information about your physical space. So these are referring to shelves on a range to where the boxes are being located. So let's get into how do you create them. Remember that things like container profiles, location profiles, and locations are global in your ArchivesSpace installation. So if you have a multi-repository installation, like there's more than one, then you need to remember that so people aren't continuously creating the same location profiles because they can be shared. So we're going to change repositories. We're going to go to SCA. I'm going to select that one. I'm doing this because of the resource records I'll be using as examples are in this repository. But when you create these location profiles, like I said, across multiple repositories, they can be used. So we're going to go to System. And we're going to choose Manage Location Profiles. This is something that you have to have permission to do. So just remember that. It is a part of permissions. You'll see that we already have 2 location profiles. These are not created like a preset. They're just created as a part of the info that we already have in these instances that we're using for trainings. So from here, you can view and edit what's already been created. You can see we have one for standard shelf and one for oversized shelf. We're going to be creating location profile for like a flat file kind of thing. Let me get through this. So when you want to create, you're going to click Create Location Profile. What is required is a name, and that's generally what only thing required. But you can see in this blue here, a note that says you need to add dimension units, depth, height, and width if you want to use the space calculator. Any locations that don't have this profile with this information will be omitted when you're doing the space calculator. So you won't have accurate results of what's available to you. So we're going to name this flat file drawer. So this will give us info on the dimensions of a drawer to be used to store like maps, oversized materials, that kind of thing. We're doing drawers and location profiles and as a location because it helps with space calculation, but you can also do drawers as containers, especially if you're putting folders into a drawer and you want to calculate for how many folders are in that drawer. Doing so is totally up to you. But for space calculation, it's good to have the location profile. So we're going to be doing this in inches. So the depth we have for this one is 40. We're going to be doing height as 2.5. So that's how tall the drawer is. And then the width as 50. So if you have one of those flat file cases, this is a drawer in that case. You see here that you like container profiles, like extent and all that. You can calculate this in inches, feet, yards, millimeters, centimeters, meters. Once you choose an option, I highly recommend sticking with it because conversions can get wonky. So if you're going to do it in feet, keep doing all your profiles in feet and doing the calculations that way. So once you've created it, you're going to click Save Profile. If you would like to create another one, you click +1, and similar to container profile, it should open a new location profile, have saved the other one that's created, we're good to go, and you can go through the steps of creating a new one. So from here, I'm not going to create another one. We already have some, so we're going to leave this. So you can see in our list of location profiles, we have 3 now. We have our standard shelf, oversized shelf, and flat file drawer. So we are going to associate those with locations, right? Yes, but we're also going to create locations at the same time, because if you go to browse here, we don't have any locations in this instance, in this installation right now. So we need instances. So we're going to create a single location in order to show you how to add profiles, and then we'll get into batch location. So first I'll go into from browse, you can create locations. From the create field, you can create locations. The create dropdown will give you an option of single locations or create batch locations. If you have multiple locations, you can edit a batch, and I will show you that. It's very different from creating a batch. So we'll get into that in a moment. But let's go and create a single location by just clicking create location, or from the drop down, choosing location and clicking single. So when you're in a location and you want to associate a profile with it, you're going to scroll down to where it says location profile. You can type ahead here and choose your profile, or you can browse or create. So if you haven't already created the location profile, you can create it from here, and it will give you the same fields that you had previously in the create location profile. So you can create it from here. It also still notes that you need all this info in order to use Space Calculator. Or you can just browse and it will give you the list of what we have. So we're going to choose flat file. I'm going to link. So that's how you would link it in this instance for creating this. And then I'll get into how to do it with already created ones after we've created a few of these. So let's go through now, unless there's a question about location profiles. Let's go through creating a location.
Questions yet?
Okay, good. So let's create location records. So as we've been talking about, this is for your physical space. Storage locations are for your shelves, your drawers, your file cabinets, your bins, your walls, etc. Wherever you store your archival materials, and you have like records in here, like so your accession, your resource records in here, indicating that you have content that's physical, you can create a location record forever that is. So this can track both permanent and temporary locations of materials. So the first thing you'll see is a checkbox. Is it temporary? If it is, you would check that. And then you could choose temporary type if you have any to choose from. It's not allowing us to do that in this instance. But temporary ones tend to, it's a tricky way of doing it because you have to remember to remove the location when it's in a more permanent location or move to another temporary location. So you have to stay on track with where your items are being held and go back into it and change for the container. Locations are associated at the top with top containers. So you add them that way, and we'll show you after some have been created how to do such. So this is just how you represent your repository storage spaces. So all the rooms, the floors, everything you have your stuff in that physical space. So if it's not temporary, you can skip that. The only thing required when building a location out is the building. So sorry. So you want to make sure you have that in there. And this is like the physical building it's housed in. So that's like for us at Georgia State, one of our storage facilities is the university library. That's the name of the building. So we would put university library here. If yours is called a different name, if you want to say that it's in the alumni hall, like it's in the basement of alumni hall, you can put that here. So what's the name of the building, and how would you like it to be referred to in the location? Because locations can only be seen on the back end. On the public side, no one's seeing these locations. So therefore, you and your staff and how you would like them to be represented in this system. So we're going to use the university library. So we're just going to build out what's happening at Georgia State. So the floor. Where in the building, what floor of the building is it located on? So we house our stuff on the 8th floor. So you can literally type 8th floor, or you can leave it as 8, knowing that floor comes after building when you see location records. So I like to make sure I have the word floor in there just in case when people are reading this and they don't know. So we're on the 8th floor. What room on that floor is it stored in? We're going to say that it's stored in storage room 1. That's the name of the storage room. And then what area? So what area of this room is it in? And this is not always used. Area is like in the storage room, is it stored in the corner? Is it stored somewhere very specific that you want to make sure is noted? So you would note that in area. So since we are creating one with a location profile, a flat file drawer, we're going to make sure our coordinates later on are for the flat file. So we don't have an area for this one. So we'll skip that. So if you barcode your storage areas, your shelves and all that, you would add that here. If you have a classification for it, you would add that here. And it's a unique identifier number that helps you to identify the location. So if you have unique identifier for each of your locations, each of the shelves or rooms, you would add that to this area. So you can do either or both. But if you add one, you need to make sure you've added it to your location. So I would say that if you're going to barcode all your locations, not just some. So then we move on to coordinate label. So if you're barcoding or using classifications, you don't have to use coordinates. But coordinates are an easier way when you're in the system of finding them, especially in ArchivesSpace. So coordinates refer to those shelves, the range, the row, the column it's at. So the first label would be the range. So if we're doing ranges, so at Georgia State University, we start with range 1. So range would be the label. And then coordinate, the indicator would be 1. So that's the first range in our rows of shelves. And I hate that that's not going away. Okay. Coordinate 2 would be the next level of that storage. So is it on a section? Is it on a row, a column, that kind of thing? Like, what do you call those? So we say this is section A. So you can use numbers or letters when doing coordinates. I don't mix them. Don't say 1A, 1B, because when you're doing bulk locations, the system doesn't understand that. So just be aware of that. Coordinate 3 now would refer to the exact shelf. So you would call this shelf and you would put the indicator and we'll say that this is shelf 1, that kind of thing. But since we're doing flat file, we may want to change this up. So if we're doing flat file, we might start with, this is the cabinet. This is the filing cabinet or the flat file case that everything's in. So we're going to call this cabinet. We're going to call it 1. This cabinet 1. And then the next sections are like the drawers. And we'll say this drawer 1. So we're at cabinet 1, drawer 1. And for this, we don't need coordinate 3 because we're just doing cabinets and drawers. And so when we go to location profile, we know that this is our flat file drawers, and we know the dimensions of it now. So we can then save that. If you have multiple repositories and you want to make sure people know, like when they look at this location, it's assigned to this repository, you can choose that here. So you can browse or type ahead. I know we have a few repositories in the system, but they have to have records created. So if there's not a record created for this repository, then you can add it. So remember that. You can also add functions, like what is this storage space, this location used for? So do you have a already populated drop down? So if you have an area, like say you have a freezer or a walk-in like refrigerator, and you know you store your audio visuals there, you would use the function feature and you would choose audio visual. This is something that can be changed with the manage controlled values list. So you can add to this if you have other functions that you would like to assign to your locations. The pre-loaded ones are audio-visual materials, arrivals, and shared. So if you know that this area is for audio-visuals, you can assign that function. If you know, oh, this is where we put all of our arrivals in this hallway on these shelves, you can add the function as arrivals. And then if this is a location shared between multiple repositories at your institution, you can note that here too. So those are why those are like the typical ones, but you can add more to that. And this is great when you're like viewing locations and someone's like trying to find a location for the items outside of just a space calculator. They can see what this location functions as, so they're not just putting things randomly around in the storage spaces. So if you do have that, you can add that there, and you can add multiple functions for a space, especially if it's like a bulk, if you're batch creating these and you know there's multiple functions for the various ranges, you can add that. So we're going to delete that for now. And then you can do save location. And similar to other records, you can do +1. It will save this one and open a new location record. So we're just going to save it. And now we have created a location for the University Library, 8th floor, storage room 1, cabinet 1, drawer 1. So now let's go add that to our location profile. Sorry guys, give me 1 second. No, now we don't want to do anything. Now we want to move on to bulk batch creation of location records. So
questions?
yes.
The one I think we've already answered. There was one we were holding over from earlier today. Question about drawers and top containers versus locations. So should a drawer be a top location a top container versus a location. I think we already answered that. Does the person who asked the question, are they good with that question? With that answer? One could kind of do it either way.
Yeah.
Partly depends on what is it that you think of as being the top container, the thing that you are bringing to the reading room, in which case your top container might be the flat file folder. Versus do you think of that drawer as being the background stack, the place where that flat file folder lives? So something to consider. Other question was, can you give an example of a classification you might use for a location if you weren't barcoding?
Yeah, so this is just like I said, this is a unique number that you're assigning to it. So if you have specific codes for like your location, let's say, okay, so this is in a university library special collection. So all of our locations have a UL and an SCA. So that stands for University Library, Special Collections and Archives. And we want to denote that this is location 1, the 001. That is the classification. So it's really anything you may want to assign to it. Now, barcode is just a string of numbers and letters, but classification could have even more meaning to it. So you can read this and be like, okay, I know that this is University Library, it's in Special Collections and Archives, and it's location 1. Or you can say it's University Library, it's on the 8th floor, and we know that's 001. That kind of thing. So it's like you decide how this functions for you. But keep, oh, go ahead.
Oh, we have a comment in the chat. For our classification, we use the location string, for example, GST/G-1-7. So I think it sounds like they repeat their location string in the classification.
Yeah, and you could do that. So you can use dashes. Yeah, so it's like an easy way for you to find this location if you're just looking at them. But it really depends on how you want to use it at your institution. Because if you do use locations, you don't have to use coordinate labels. And like I would have a good manual if you're using locations, like a good like cheat sheet. Because when you're using coordinate labels, people can easily say, oh yeah, this is a cabinet, it's a drawer. But when you're using classifications, it might not be that easy until you get used to it.
I'm going to go back to that original question about, is it better to have a drawer be a top container or a location? I think this question, is there an advantage to one versus the other? And is it personal preference or is there more of an advantage?
I will say that when you're doing containers, you can add the container profile and you'll have that stacking limit. So you know how many like folders can fit in there. And that's not, a location will just tell you this drawer is this large, but it won't necessarily tell you if it has a space in it until you assign a container with the container profile. So you know, oh, this container is in that drawer and there's a stacking limit of so much. So we can put another folder in there.
Really bad is actually building the top container as the flat file and saying that the flat file is like 1/4 inch thick and that they can stack, 5 high or something like that. So there are some different ways. But yeah, it's the trick is how to include that drawer in your location size. Otherwise, it gets left out. If the drawer isn't a location, it gets left out of the space calculation measurements.
Yes. So you're gonna probably want to do both. And I think that's what we do at Georgia State is we have both. So we know that the drawer is the top container, but also we have the location. So we know how many folders fit into this drawer. but is getting into the weeds. So just be aware of that. And it's really like, do you want to know how many can fit in there? Or do you want to just be able to know what you're pulling?
The question in the wings, but that's still pertaining to, I think, batch locating top containers. So I think that can wait until you get there.
Oh, okay. If there's nothing else, we will get into batch creation. So for batch creation, we're going to do like general shelves kind of thing, so you don't have to worry about the cabinets versus drawers. So to do that, you can do it from the browse list. You can do create batch locations from here, or create, choose location, create batch locations. Again, you can define this as temporary, or not. And then you'll see that the coordinate ranges are slightly different. So you're going to start with the same fields as you did in a single location record. So we're going to say University Library. If your building is just for special collections or whatnot, you can say that. We're going to say the floor. We're going to say this time it's the 3rd floor. And we're going to say that this is storage room 2. From here, you can add a location profile, but this location profile will be added to all the locations created in this batch. And you need to be aware of that, especially if the dimensions of the shelves change throughout your sections or your ranges, your columns of shelves. So you don't want to make batch locations for ones that change. You're going to want to make single locations and only make batch ones that have the same dimensions or like similar to. Like so for this, we're making batch locations for our standard shelves that will hold our standard legal size document boxes or record storage boxes. But oh, at the bottom or in the middle, there's an oversized shelf. So you go 5 down and shelf 6 is oversized. You're not going to want to have 6 in here. And you can't skip around numbers when creating batch locations. So just be aware of that. And you can create thousands of batch locations at a time, but then having to figure out which one you messed up and go and edit it, it's not that difficult, but you know, depends on how much time you want to take to do that. So we're going to choose standard shelf. And then you can assign these to a repository. So if you're making batch locations for every location in your repository, you can add your repository here and then do batch locations for the next repository, that kind of thing. So this information will be associated with every coordinate we make for this location. So you don't have to enter that information in multiple times, just once. So you see here that we have coordinate range 1. We have the start and end. You'll also see that we don't have the option to choose barcode or classification when making batch locations. That's because the system won't change the number, like go up a number, like it doesn't understand the mixture of letters and numbers, that kind of thing. So if you're using barcodes and classification, you're going to either want to create single locations. There is a way to import via CSV, I believe. Nancy, correct me if I'm wrong on that. And then there's the API and other things that help you import, and you can add barcodes and classifications that way. So similar to the single locations, for the first range, so you see it's range 1 through 3, and then we have a label, prefix, range start, range end, suffix. So the first is the well, I call this range, but the row of shelves, that kind of thing. the map case, like what's it called, that kind of thing. So we're labeling that as range. We're going to start with 1 and end with 5. So we're going to do range 1 through 5. A prefix can be like the letter of the number, and that will add to the end of it. But it will add the same letter and the same number to the beginning or end to it for the prefix or suffix. It won't go up or down in this. So the next one, we're going to do section, or your column of shelves. And we're going to call those A through C, because we label our section with letters. And if you could do numbers. It's either or. And then we're going to say shelf. So this is shelf 1 through 10. And again, based on our location profile, these will all be the same dimensions. Now you see here, there's a note saying, depending on the size of your ranges, this process may take a few minutes to complete. So when you click create location, you might have to wait a few seconds, especially if you're creating 1,000 to 10,000 locations. It can take a second. I do not recommend, if you know your system is slow to begin with, creating thousands of batch locations at one time. It's okay to go back and create more as you get used to it. You can also preview, and it will tell you how many locations you're going to make with this. So we can see that we're going to make 150. So we're going to have University Library, 3rd floor, storage room 2, range 1, section A, shelf 1 through 10. Section B, shelf 1 through 10. Section C, shelf 1 through 10. And then range 2, section A, 1 through 10. That kind of thing. If we were to go and edit this and I want the suffix to all be a capital A, a prefix to all be a capital A for the range, we can preview location and you'll see it's range A1 now rather than just 1. A2, A3, but it's not going up. It's not changing it to B. It's keeping that same letter. It will only change the letter if it's a letter within the range start and end kind of thing. Okay, so now that we know what we're getting to, what we're creating, we've previewed it, we can click create locations, or we can click +1. That will give us a new batch locations empty record, and it will create the other ones in the background depending on how many you're making. Oh yeah, it says a maximum of locations you can create is 1,000 because it knows how it can take a while. So, and it will tell you if you're maxing out. So be aware. So batch in progress. We're waiting a second. And we have 150 locations created. It takes you back to the browse list once those have been created. It doesn't keep you in the record. So we can see, and it will sort them based on the first coordinate. So range 1, it's going to do that, go through 10 and so forth. I'm going to create another batch and I'm going to create some map cases so I can show you how to add a location profile to a batch. So we're just going to say this is University Library for 3rd floor, room, storage room 2. And then we're not going to add location profile to this. We're going to add a function. We're just going to say this is map case A, and we're going through D. And coordinate range 2 is your 1 through 5. You can preview that. So you know on the 3rd floor, you have 4 map cases, each with 5 drawers. So you can create those. We're going to create, and you can see they are populated, but we know they have no location profile. So when you want, if you would like to batch update those, you can. but it's not the same as creating batch ones. So in order to update them from this browse list, you can select all the ones that are shown in the results. So it's only going to show you the first 10. You can edit this to show you like 20, 50, that kind of thing, but it's preset to 10. And then you can go and say edit batch. So it's going to let you edit all the records you selected, but max of 10 on the page. And it's going to ask if you would like to change any of this information. So you can change all of it or just some of it. So we're going to change the location profile. We're going to say it's a flat file for, and then we're going to update locations. So now that it's updated, it's only updated those 10. It doesn't care that we created actually 20 with that batch location, because it's only was able to select the first 10. So we were able to add the location profile to those first 10. If we wanted to add more, we would have to go to the next page, find those, and then select them, make sure we only selected the ones we want, and then edit batch. So if you have created 1,000 location records, batch updating them, whether editing the name, the room, whatever, will take a minute. So again, you want to figure out who you want to give permissions to, because if everyone can create a location, it's going to get crazy. They're also shared across repositories. You want to make sure when you're creating it, if you want to add a location profile, you probably want to add that when you're creating it, especially for space management. So if you decide to do so later, it may take a while, or you may have to use the API kind of thing. So just think about that when you're creating these. But yeah, that is creating batch locations and editing them. Do you have any questions about that?
I've got a couple questions, a little bit of a chat going on the side about someone was asking, do you all write locations on boxes to aid with reshelving? And someone was saying part of their call numbers is that the location actually appears on their label. But if there are other options out there, people would like to chime in on the chat on that one.
I actually have something for that.
Go for it.
So we at Georgia State are hosted by Atlas. So we use Aon. And with Aon, you're able to, when you request something, you're able to print out call slips. So for these call slips have two sides. The side that tells you who's requested it, what it is, we attach that to our box. It's in our research room. It has location on there, but no one understands what that means when they look at it. But then the other side says item in use, and we put that on the shelf, like on an out card, that kind of thing. And that tells us what goes there and its location. So we always use Aon when requesting things for class, researchers, exhibits, that kind of thing. So whenever we're looking at that box, we know why it's out, plus the location in which it lives. That's not an advertisement for Aon. I'm just saying that kind of system would help with this kind of stuff.
I'd say also as something that we do is for our institutional records that are often staff only, so they just don't circulate as much. A lot of our more public materials we actually circulate. We have like Ex Libris as all notes. Most of the circulation is handled out of that, as opposed to ASpace, because ASpace is not really meant to be a circulation system. But it is possible to assign two locations to a box in ArchivesSpace. And we sometimes will use that as a hack. So I'll leave the existing location that shows where its regular shelf location is, and then I might change it, add a second one that says institutional archives work, a suite, just briefly, because I know someone from legal is coming over to look for the box, and it's going to go right back out in it can't circulate in our library catalog because it's not open to the public. So sometimes then we just have to go in and remove that second location for the box later. Again, a bit of a hack because ArchivesSpace is not meant to be a circulation system, but we do handle it that way a little bit. And then we just look up the box number to see where to put it back.
Yeah, I will say that using a system where we like identify on our boxes, at least with a call slip about where it is and who's using it, has helped so much.
It's better to do it that way.
Yeah.
Ours is a hack, but it's only for things that again don't circulate much and only, again, if it's staff only and it only goes to one place so we know where it is. And yeah, the second location would kind of be temporary. You still have to go in and manually remove it. But if I were to go and look up the box and manage top containers, I would see it's at 2 locations and I would know that the second one is like our suite and then I know what's going on with it. So we do have one other question in here, which is how do you fix or merge duplicate locations?
Fix or merge duplicate locations.
So if you accidentally had the same location in there twice, I've actually seen this happen, where maybe something was misspelled or was accidentally created twice. How do you fix that?
Why can't I remember if that's actually a thing you can do?
And I don't think you can merge them.
Yeah,
I think what
no.
you do is actually reassign the boxes at a given location to the one you want to keep. And then I think once the one you want to get rid of is actually empty and it has no holdings, then you can delete it. I
Yes.
think you might have a hard time deleting a location that has boxes actually assigned to it.
Yeah, you have to move the boxes out of there.
Yeah.
It won't let you delete them. So there's no merging, like, but if you want a merge feature, I would request it through our Jira site for feature requests and bug fixes. Because that seems like something that's necessary, right? So I'm going back to temporary locations. So there's 2 ways of doing temporary, and I'm about to show you what I'm talking about with that. But the temporary is good for if you know you have a space that's for location, for exhibits, or a space for holds for researchers. You can say it's at that temporary location. So you can create all those temporary locations and have them and just move the boxes to them when you have those boxes in that temporary location. Or you can, even your arrivals location can be temporary in your list of locations. So you know, these don't stay here forever, that kind of thing. But then when you are editing and adding, so if we're going to a collection, let's say, so you're in an instance and you're like, I need to add a location to this. I have no locations. You add your location to your top containers. So you're going to view the top container. This is one way of doing that. Then you edit. And then you're going to add location. In here, it will have a status. So you can say this is current or previous location. That's a way of noting that, oh, this changed. So that's a way of saying it was previously at this location. So it was previously at the arrivals location. And it's currently here. So we can have multiple locations and have one that was the temporary location and one that's its permanent location. I don't recommend that because it's just a lot of things you have to edit in ArchivesSpace and remember to do in ArchivesSpace. But if it helps you, then go for it. But so if you add like it was previously there, you can add the dates. It may help you track how long stuff stays in your arrivals area or how long stuff stays on exhibit, that kind of thing, or how long you had to hold it for a researcher. So just be aware of that. So there's 2 ways of like denoting it was temporarily somewhere, or this is a temporary location for this container. So now if there's no other questions about temporary locations or like locations in general, I want to show you adding the locations. And we'll do both just singly adding and then bulk adding of locations. Okay. So we are already.
There are a
Go
couple
ahead.
questions, but I think maybe we can wait on them to let you get through some of the rest of the core content and come to these maybe with the final wrap up.
Yeah, that sounds good. So we are currently in the Marie Pirelli collection. And we see that we have all these top containers, but as we scroll down to instances, there's no location associated with it. If there's a location associated with a top container, that location appears as a blue box under top container. And that's how you know, oh, this has a location. Like, let me show you. Okay. So if we go into this database and we go to, I'm in the wrong repository, sorry guys. We browse and we go back to our good old Krispy Kreme, because who doesn't like donuts? And we go into edit, and we're just going to choose the first thing we see. We go down to instances. Well, at some point this had location associated with. Oh, I'm in the wrong one. I was in the wrong one. That's what I thought. I like when ArchivesSpace opens up new tabs, but then it will mess me up. But anyways, I'll show you right after this. So it should appear there. Sorry that I was in the wrong repository. So if it's not there, you can edit this. And that was quite weird. Okay, let's go back to the repository I was in. And then let's look at resources. We're going to back to Marie Pirelli. We're going to edit. You can begin to edit our view really to see instances. I'm going to select one of these. Go down to our instances. There is an easier way to do this, trust me. I'm just showing you from this way. So you're going to edit the top container, and then you're going to add a location. From here, as I said, it will require status and start date. I literally just choose current, and the date I added is the start date for me. You can change that, but you don't have to. You can add a note about why it's located here. It could be for an exhibit, for arrivals, that kind of thing. So there is a note field. From here, you can browse, create, or find with Space Calculator. Since we don't currently have any top containers associated with locations, the Space Calculator will just say, we have all spaces available. So we're going to do that in a minute. So we're going to browse. From here, you're able to filter by text. You can also choose different facets for your results. So you know all locations I want to use are on the 3rd floor, and I want the standard shelves. You can see that. So it will sort it based on how you would like it sorted. So we're gonna look for range 1. You want to assign it there. And you can see all range 1, section A, shelf 1. We're going to click link, and that will appear as the location for this top container. Any archival object that has box 1 as a top container in this collection, or if it's across different collections, will now be associated with this location, because you can see all the linked records. So all archival objects in box 1 now have range 1, section A, shelf 1 as its location. So we can exit out of this. We'll save our archival object just in case. If we go back down, it will take a second to populate that kind of thing. You can click on any of these, and it should, under instances, show you the location. And you can click on this location And it will allow you to edit it from there if you need to, but also show all linked records associated with this location, which you can see as box 1 from the Marie Corelli collection. So let's do this an easier way. Say we want to bulk update our top containers with collections. Oh my God. You're going to click on Manage Top Containers from the gear menu. You're going to search for either resource, accession, whatever you're adding locations to. So we're going to do Marie Corelli. We're going to search. You see that we have all these boxes. We're going to choose box 2 and 3 because box 1 should have a location, but sometimes it takes a second for it to appear in this. We're going to go to bulk operations. You can choose either update locations single location, so they're all on the same shelf or same area, or update multiple locations. So that's if they each of these containers have a different location. So if you're in a if you're in a resource that has 40 boxes and they're not all on the same shelf, you can update all of them to different locations if you would like. I'll show you what that looks like. It can get unwieldy if it's a lot of boxes, but in here you can literally start typing to find what you want. And I will show you, okay, yeah, let's and I want from that one. And then you can do the same, or you can browse. You can also create locations from here if the location wasn't already created. So, oh, this is in storage room 1, because this is a flat file. And there you go. So, and then you would just link them. We're going to say that these are all in the same location. So that looks like this. It's just showing you both. And then you will choose the location. Again, you can browse or create. We're going to want to put this in the same location as the first box. So we're updating box 2 and 3 of the Marie Corelli collection. We see we have legal document boxes and legal 2.5 Hollander, which is a slim one. And we're going to update both records. When you update something through top containers, it does tell you it can take a minute. So your updates don't automatically show up when you link them. But if you give it a few moments, it will eventually show you the location. But you can see those from the resource record as well. If you have a larger collection, say we want to update Krispy Kreme. Oh, yes. If you have a larger collection, we're going to go to a different repository. Again, locations are shared across repositories. So I created them, they're there. We can go to whatever repositories we have access to, and we can update them. But if you're in managed top containers, it only works for the repository you're in. So we can see here that we have 44 boxes. Are they all the same? Not sure. They are all legal document boxes, but of course, those don't all fit on the same shelf. So if you want, you can just select all of them, multiple locations, some of them, and go from there. But we do have an oversized box. So let's select that one and put it on in a flat drawer if we want. So we're going to update single location. And go map case. A drawer 1. And update record. And there we go. And again, it takes a second to see. And then we're going to change indicators. If you do this, it will select all 44. And if you go to multiple locations, you will see all 44. and have to choose a location for all 44 containers. Just FYI. Any questions about adding locations to containers?
Sorry, there's always something covering something when I need to unmute. There was the longstanding question, can you bulk import locations for top containers if the top containers already exist in ArchivesSpace? Does this ability to bulk assign containers to locations answer that question from earlier this morning? And this really isn't importing them for top containers. What you could do to import them for top containers, if you didn't have any containers, that spreadsheet that I used earlier, to bulk import the top containers to an existing finding aid that didn't have them, there is a field in there where you could add, if you knew the location, that location ID appears in the URI for that location. You could put that in the that import and bring it in, but that's the only way I know of to import a a location in conjunction. Yes, so I'm just looking at the chat here for Brittany's benefit. Yes, that spreadsheet that I did, the download for that little collection that didn't have any containers. What actually in that case is I actually went through and deleted them all so I could show you how to import them because they originally had them. But when I brought that in, I put in the ID number for the container profile. There's also a way to put in the ID number in the very last field, I believe, for the location if you know it. But that's the only way that I know of to import and automatically link locations in that way.
Yeah.
So there's that. And then other questions that we have in the chat right now. I figure using the temporary location works for something like researches or exhibition, but what if you have an oversized box that goes across two shelves? Say it's regular shelving and there's no barrier between it. It just takes up both shelves on both sides. Will assigning two locations work for space calculation? And then there's Thomas, I have the same question about oversized boxes going across two shelves, basically from one range of through one side of the range to the opposite side.
Yeah, so there are like two ways basically. You can assign both locations and have that box be on both locations because you can have multiple locations for a box. Or you can do the location as one side of it and have the location profile dimensions be measured for both shelves across it. So you assign that location profile to that shelf. And then you only have one location assigned to it, but oh, it's an oversized shelf, like, and you can call it a certain thing, like through and through or something. Because we did that at one of my institutions where we had an oversized box that went through both, and it was just an oversized shelf with one location, but it was the width, the dimension of both shelves together. We gave the stacking limit for the container profile, and we just made sure you make sure you have the right location profile assigned to it. And that way, when you're calculating space, oh, I can fit another oversized box on top of this and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's the way I'd handle that as well, as I'd actually make it like a double-sized shelf. The trick I think I'd use in that case is I'd pick one side. So if the range is like you have a column or you have like a stack and you have a set of columns down one side and a set of columns down the other, and clearly it's taking up a shelf across both sides, I would probably build out that as an oversized shelf and just pick one of those like columns. And then on the other side, I'd probably just not build it out as a location. So it'd be like one oversized shelf and maybe the column on the other side, rather than having 7 shelves, has 6 or something.
And it skips one.
Yeah, that might be the way I would handle it, just so it would be, otherwise it might look like you had two oversized shelves there. You built it out
Mhm.
from both sides. So I think that's probably how I would do it, is I would just build out, as Brittany said, that shelf to be double oversized, but I just sort of ignore it or number it. There's a comment coming in, all of our collections are on book shelving. The aisles have numbers like 24, 25. Can you combine numbers like that? You probably could. I
Yeah,
think so long as you're internally consistent, I think you can get away with a lot so long as you're internally consistent.
yeah, definitely.
And then I'm trying to think. I think we've answered all of the questions that have come up. Please throw stuff in the chat if I've missed one here.
I think let's
Uh,
get through space calculator and
yep,
then because
because
we
we're
only
running
have
up on time.
yes, and we want to show you this because this is why you're here. So let's say, okay, we've added locations to some spaces. Now you're like, okay, where does this box fit? So we have box 1 from Krispy Kreme. And you want to add the location. So you're in the top container view, you're editing it, and you go to add location. This is where you can click find with space calculator. And you're going to choose the building you want to use. Because if you have multiple buildings, you have multiple places to choose from. Same with floor. Oh, I want to try the 3rd floor. You can even choose a room. You don't have to do that. It's not required. You could leave all those blank and it would do all your locations and see if there's room in any of those locations. So then you're going to click check for space. And you're going to see up here that we have a total of 896 spaces available. Locations with space available for this container, there's 150 because you need to have a container profile associated with it, and you use that container to find a space that suits those dimensions. So we have that. We have the legal document box. So it's 15 inches deep, 10 to 11 inches high, 5 inches wide. So it's like, okay, in storage room 2, you have all these spaces available. Well, you're like, I want to see all spaces, no matter if it says it's available or not. So you can click all of them. And it will show you all of them. And over here, it will then show you how many container or space and based on the container that you can fit there. You can see for these map cases, the container is bigger than the location in at least one dimension. So it's like, don't put it there. It won't fit. You can't use that space. But for the ones with the standard shelf, you can see you can fit 6 boxes there easily. So you're like, okay, I'm going to put it range 1, section A, shelf 2. And I don't know why I'm saying that. There's an error going on, but this is where you would link it. So now you've linked it. You save your top container. Box 1 from Krispy Kreme Records now has that location associated with it. And you did it all by using your space calculator, which accurately accounted for space. So you don't go and put it in a map case on accident. Okay, questions. That was really quick. I'm sorry for that.
As a quick reminder, the other place where you can find the space calculator button is within the container profile. So if you happen to know that you need to put a particular size box someplace, you can go in here, just as Brittany's showing you, and this is the other place, and it has exactly the same functionality.
Oh no, this stuff doesn't fit anywhere. Unfortunately, our FAT file does not fit any of our dimensions. So that can also tell you to tell admin, I need a space for all my stuff. So if you're running out of space, space calculator is great for that.
The other, okay. Um, So what is the two questions. What is the recommended use of the physical location field in resource record notes?
Say that again?
And we might need our person to respond to this one. What is the recommended use of the physical location field? Oh, I think so. If we're in, I think
Oh,
what
yeah.
she means is if we're in the resource record, there's a note for physical location. What is the recommended use of that? Probably as opposed to any of this.
That is a carryover from DAX to the standards. So that's one of the standard notes that you can be added to a finding aid. So keep that in mind. And then it's if you want to know that information when you're looking at a finding aid and you want people who are looking at it on the public side to know the physical location as well, because that can be published.
The location note may be used as well for something like, this is stored in an off-site warehouse. It might take 2 days to turn it around, as opposed to this is the actual shelf location, which is better tracked in the functionality that we're showing you. Particularly since I think for some repositories, their actual location information could be considered highly confidential, and they wouldn't want that in a more publicly accessible note.
Yeah.
So there are things to consider there too.
So yeah, so some people use it, some people don't, but it's really up to you.
Then, so next question. Earlier you mentioned keeping units of measurement consistent to avoid things getting wonky. If location profiles are in inches, but container profiles are in feet, will that mess up the space calculator? I think the system is smart enough to translate. I haven't noticed it not. In my own use in-house, though, I have tended to be pretty consistent in the choice of measurement that I've used across the board. And I haven't had a chance to sleuth it out in this enough to know to what degree it messes up or not. I think it's mostly smart enough to be able to do that translation.
Yeah.
But again, the more consistent, the better.
Yeah, it just makes more sense, especially when you're adding new containers, adding new locations, that kind of thing. Just to stay consistent in case it like gets wonky because you're off by so many or and such. We have one final question, it looks like. Is there a way for the space calculator to tell you how much total space is available in linear feet, assuming you've entered all the locations and container profiles?
Best way I've done that is actually to sort of to pick a standard box size and then to go through and, kind of, I think if you scroll all the way to the bottom on that screen, I think, no, I've found some way to say, like, to be able to aggregate, like, okay, I can put, 1,700 of this size boxes, and then I can do the math from there. And again, I think you could also, I've got reports that I run on the side against the ArchivesSpace database using Crystal and other things that enable me to calculate those figures.
Yeah.
And we could check the internal reports as well to see
Yeah.
if there's a way to aggregate.
There might be a way to use the custom reports feature or just the reports in general to calculate that, but I'm not certain. And then you could do just some math, you have, if you know how many locations have a certain standard shelf, that kind of thing. But that could take a second.
Like on that screen, the 895 for this size box, then you could do the math, 895 times 5 inches. And it would give you that would give you a rough estimate of how much total available space you have.
Yeah.
For a stand-up box as opposed to a flat file.
Yes. So we are out of time, but we will gladly answer any more questions that you guys have. As said earlier, the recording will be available and you will get an email about it. And you can watch the recording. But if you have any other questions, feel free to ask them. We'll stay on for like another minute. Okay, well, I hope this was
All right.
helpful and that you guys will consider using the space calculator and doing space management.
Thank you all, and thank you for all the great questions.
Yes.
Sorry we ran over all kinds of time, but I'm glad we could answer as many as we could for you.
Yeah. Have a good one, everyone.
Yep. Bye-bye.